quite as contradictory in my soul.
Right.
I'm like, I don't have to be quite as intense
Well,
about it, if
and
that makes sense.
that can be good. You know, I talk to a lot of people who will, I guess, get so downtrodden by the world that they even tend to sway towards almost anarchy.
Yeah.
And my response is always, okay, so if you were to just throw your phone in the ocean and, you know, take a hike, not look at your phone for 2 weeks, would you still feel the same way?
Right.
And most of the time the answer is, well, probably not.
Right.
And so I do think there is a healthy point in not always being so caught up in being up to date on every little thing, because there really is so much, especially if you're looking at state, federal, politics, and then all the things outside of politics too, which I'll admit I am not great on. If you want to my friends and I joke about it, but I'm the worst person to catch on to jokes about pop culture, movies, or music. Not my thing at all.
Fair,
so trying to stay up to date on all of the things really just isn't feasible. So it's completely okay to not follow it the closest. But that being said, what do you think are some things that us as candidates could do to, I guess, make it more clear who we are, what we stand for?
That's a great question, actually. I really like what you're doing, Katie, because you are very young. You're probably the youngest candidate I've seen. But because I saw you kind of getting into the picture of politics, it actually piqued my interest, not in necessarily me wanting to be a part of it, but definitely in seeing you putting your foot in that and being so young. And I'm sure that you get comments and people saying, like, this girl's too young, she doesn't know what she's talking about. However, I have seen so many of the things online, especially of you and your presence. You just have a very mature presence. And so honestly, what you're doing right now, getting more young people involved alone in politics, I think is a really great thing, because we don't see a lot of that. And I think with what you're doing, a lot of what Turning Point is doing, those are things that are really pushing young people into the atmosphere to pay attention to what's going on.
Absolutely.
Because I agree, if I spend every second of every day paying attention to, you know, the politics and what I see online, I'm a feeler. So I just feel so deeply about everything. And if I can take a step back, but I also know that there are other young, wise people that are stepping into those roles because that's where God's directing them, it gives me a lot more comfort. So honestly, to answer your question, what you're doing right now and how much you're putting yourself out there, like being at the fairgrounds and walking around and talking to people, I don't see a lot of actually older people.
I don't know that we've seen any candidates right now at the state level
I've never seen
getting on
else.
And just doing. I mean, this is what, like, the 8th podcast we've done at the fair so far. Like, this is definitely unique, but we're changing things, and I think we're changing them for the better. And as far as being a younger candidate goes, you know, the two things I kind of have to say is we've seen time and time again that age does not always correlate with competence.
Yes.
Right? You can have an 80-year-old, you can have a 50-year-old, you can have a 20-year-old, and they can all be equally competent or incompetent, right? It's not a direct correlation there. And then the second thing is, I love Ronald Reagan's quote that freedom is never more than a generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children through the bloodstream. It must be fought for and then handed down for them to also fight for and protect it. Otherwise, and as Reagan said, we'll spend our sunset years telling our grandkids what it was like when America was free.
Absolutely.
And so it is vital to have that next generation step up and take ownership over their faith and their freedoms.
Yeah, absolutely. And to see that that's possible, because like I said, we don't see a lot of young people out here doing this type of thing, but because you are doing that, for young people to see other young people doing it.
It proves that it's possible.
Exactly. And it proves that being a young person today, it's hard to go out there and say, I'm proud of this country. I'm proud. Well, for some people, it's hard. It's easy for me, but for some people, it's hard to go out there and say, I'm proud of this country. I'm proud of the morals we stand on. I'm proud of the people that we are. And so for young people to go out and see it's okay to have that opinion, even if you don't want to be involved in politics, I think is so important. So I absolutely agree with you in that competence can be many ages.
Absolutely. And that's something that we can agree on no matter what party you're on, you know? People will always have other politicians that look at and they go, oh, they're incompetent, right?
No matter what.
So with that being said, let's jump into what are some of the questions that you would have as a voter for me?
Yeah, I guess one question, which might be a little more personal, if I could ask every person I voted for, I probably would, but it's not quite so easy. What gave you the heart to step into this role? What made you think, you know, as young as you are, that you thought, I'm going to do this, and I think that I need to. What was that kind
So
of
my
catalyst?
story for how I stepped into it was I've always been pretty intrigued by politics. I, was the speech and debate nerd, all of that. And then it just so happened, like, total God moment, giving me the resume I needed to be able to do this. But I always joke I got promoted from babysitter to political analyst. I was literally babysitting, and then a lady from church I was babysitting for said, "Katie, you seem like a really responsible young lady. How'd you like to work for my political consulting company?" And that was when I was 14. So since then, I've just had other jobs. Most recently, I worked in the governor's office doing constituent services. And then it was I was actually at my job there when another candidate came in and said, "Katie, are you going to run? Because we need more people with strong morals and principles to stand up and run for office, because it's hard to get people to step up. We have districts still that did not end up with any conservative candidates. Luckily, we got pretty much all of our Lewis and Clark County seats filled. There's one district that doesn't have a Republican, but we've got a Libertarian there. So it's like,
it'll pass.
That's good enough. But there are districts across the state that don't have a single conservative running in them.
And I didn't know that.
That's rough. And so ultimately it came down to there was a need, and I realized that I had the capability of filling that need. Initially, when I was asked to run, I said, "No, you're crazy."
Right.
Like, I think that conversation started with, "So you're 18, right? You can run for office now." And I laughed. I was like, "Haha, yeah, I'll be a nice little receptionist, laugh at your joke. You're so funny." No, you're crazy. And then after a while, I spent some time and prayed about it and realized that the only reason I said no for sure was because that's a scary thing to do, is to put yourself out like that. And ultimately, I realized all the other reasons I'd given myself to not run were just reasons I was justifying my own fear. And when I prayed about it, I felt at peace with it, and I felt like it was the way that God was calling me to step up and serve my neighbors and friends around me. And at that point, I can never let fear to almost become an idol in my life when it is the thing that ends up getting in between me and the thing that God has called me to do.
Absolutely.
And apart from that, so that's why I got into the race, but ultimately the thing that pushes me forward is, again, my faith. Because I have such a strong dedication to truth and goodness and beauty because of my faith. It gives me something to stand for. And I also keep telling people, I don't know how anyone who's not a Christian could ever do this, because you get digging into policies and there's so much nuance and so much of it. And it could be really easy to get discouraged and to just, go to bed every night in that place of confliction. But we don't have to be like that, because, and I'm talking a lot about faith because I also know that, you're on the same page with me here. That I can still, at the end of the day, say, this world is crazy, but I serve a God who is unchanging, unshakable, unfailing. So no matter what happens, I still have his love and his truth and his goodness and beauty that'll follow me all the days of my life. Right? And so I can take peace in that, and then can put my best foot forward the next day to serve others. So that's a pretty long answer to your question there. But what are some other questions you would have?
Well, you kind of did answer. I was thinking, as you were talking, I thought of, as a Christian, how do you balance that your Christianity with politics? Because it absolutely works together. It absolutely does. I just think that a lot of times you see, when you get Christians and politics together, people just frown on it. And
Christian nationalists.
Right? It's like, that's not how it has to be. So I really appreciate that you can so freely talk about your faith and have that testament as on your walk as well in this race. I'm assuming that's what it's called.
You got it.
My next question would probably be, if I'm being honest, I don't know a lot of what each representative actually does for Montana. That's something that I am probably more naive in. What are something that, if you get elected, is going to be your priority, I guess, in that role?
So I would say my priorities or my key issues are affordability, limited government, and upholding Montana values. And so what that boils down to, I mean, affordability is pretty straightforward, and I think it's also something that I can have a unique perspective on as a young person, because the things that I'm looking at saying, oh, how am I going to be able to afford that, are going to be different than somebody who's already got, I guess, you know, somebody who maybe already owns a home, has an established career, maybe is even looking into retirement. You know, those things are going to be different. And since we have a citizen legislature here in Montana, you know, it's okay to have that different perspective. In fact, it's valuable because all of the representatives and senators can bring their own unique perspectives to ultimately do all we can to serve every Montanan to the best of our abilities. So that kind of covers affordability. And I also think affordability, when you get down to the line item list, I think property taxes is it's going to be a big issue going into this next session. And that affects the housing market significantly. And there are a few things that were done in the last session in regards to property taxes that I don't necessarily think were the most beneficial. For example, we shifted some of the, sorry, if you guys are listening, can hear that music. It just got really loud. But we'll just keep going. That's what you get for doing live podcasts. Yeah, we shifted some of that tax onto businesses, which, if you know anything about economics, you know that that's probably not the best move, because then the businesses have to also up their prices to then be able to afford higher taxes. So the same people end up paying for it. The only difference is you don't actually see the number that you're paying for. It's just all of a sudden you're paying more, and you would never even realize, except for you got less money in your pocket. So that's a pretty significant concern of mine. Limited government as my second key point. I think that kind of informs how I view a multitude of issues. Is every issue I approach, I'm going to be asking the sort of questions: will this expand government? It also comes down to, what do I believe is the role of government, which can be found not only constitutionally but also from a biblical perspective. Romans 13 says the government does not bear the sword in vain. And it very clearly lays out that government is instituted by God for our good to uphold justice. And so I think it's important to distinguish that government does not have to be the savior of the world. Right? Its role is to uphold justice. And so to view it through that lens, and that lens of limited government, I think is really valuable, and ultimately will help aid in those other priorities like affordability and Montana values. And when I talk about Montana values, I tend to go two directions with that. I talk about conservation, because, you know, I grew up hunting and fishing and hiking and even rock climbing with my family. So that's something I'm really passionate about. And I think it's something that makes Montana unique compared to a lot of other states. So we've got to make sure that we're able to preserve that. The other way that I see as being a core part of Montana values is what I would consider family values, or traditional family values. And that also spills over into education, which I would say is another one of my key priorities. And I think it's an area of policy that I can have a really unique perspective into.
Can I ask you about your opinions on education? How your thoughts on that? I'd actually be very curious.
Well, and for context, as some of you may know, I'm a homeschool graduate, and I'm also 19. So my perspectives on education are going to be awfully unique compared to, you know, a 70-year-old guy in the legislature. And while that legislator might have a great perspective on some other issues, it's going to be different than what I can bring to the table. So what specific education policies or like stances would you be curious to know more about?
Honestly, I don't know a whole lot about the education policies, because I was public schooled. However, our kids will be homeschooled because I was just public schooled, so I know what it's like. And I'd prefer to be able to do that myself. And so I don't know a lot about what policies. However, I'm curious if you can answer the question of what, when it comes to education, what policies in particular do you think of when you want to make a change, or when you want to, you know, have a different course of action? What are those things?
All of my ideas with education, some of the specific ideas for bills I have is more related to homeschooling. One of the problems we have right now is homeschool diploma or transcript is not given equal authority as a public school one. So when you look into things like, I was talking to a guy who is a fire chief. I don't remember where in Montana, but he said he had several homeschool graduates come that he would have loved to hire, but he couldn't legally accept them because legally their homeschool diploma did not have equal authority.
Wow.
And that's also true for police and several other, I guess, more blue collar type jobs that probably shouldn't, you know, I truly believe that homeschooling would give any student an equal, if not better, education than the public schools. So a diploma as a homeschooler should also carry that same weight. And I've talked to other candidates, like John, who's recording this actually, John is also a homeschool dad. And when his daughter tried to take a few classes with the public school, they were facing issues from the teacher saying that her homeschool grades weren't of equal value.
Wow.
So we need to get something in place as far as the legal side of things goes to further clarify, because right now I think it's just undefined in the law as part of the problem. But we need to clarify that homeschool diplomas are in grades are of equal weight and authority as those from any other type of education, including private schools. You know, private schools, even though they don't tend to face the same problems to the same extent that homeschoolers do, it's still a problem for them too.
Right. Absolutely.
So there's a specific policy, but in general, all of my efforts in education focus on getting greater transparency for teachers to know what is happening with a kid in the classroom. I've talked to several families and, you know, as I'm running this campaign, I talk to a lot of voters and I just listen to their concerns. And I've talked to so many who don't feel like they have a good grasp on what their kid is learning in the schools. And I've even talked to people who said that certain political agendas were being pushed on their students without their knowledge, and even to the point of, you know, their student identifying as, you know, something other than the way that I would say God created them, and that being hidden from the parents. And I don't think that the public schools should ever be promoting that sort of, I guess, behind the scenes actions that's non-transparent with the parents.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I went to public school. My husband was homeschooled. And just seeing the difference in how we retained information. And of course, every person is different. I'm going to retain information even if I was homeschooled differently than he would. However, when I look at the things that I remember from school versus a lot of the things that he remembered from school, they're very different. He remembers, and he took a very nice curriculum that I really, really, really appreciated. I think you took it as well, Classical Conversations. But he remembers so much about the United States history, and he remembers things that I'm like, yeah, we might have talked about that for a day, but he remembers those things about history and about laws, and I'm like, we never spoke about that in class. And it was always funny because I would hear my friends say, my conservative friends, well, I had to like say this in my grade to get, or in my paper to get a good grade. And I never believed that until I was met with that in my freshman year of high school. I was met with a very blatant, like, hey, you wrote this paper, maybe think about it in a different way. When it was an opinion-based paper. And I was a freshman, so I was like, I knew immediately, wait, this is blatantly wrong. And I told my mom about it, and my mom's like, you don't have to rewrite that paper. And so, so I've definitely seen that in the public school, and I only graduated a couple years ago. And so, I really appreciate that you mentioned that, and just realizing that the government may fund these schools, but the parents are still the parents. And those children go home to their parents.
Parents have the number one God-given authority and responsibility over their child's education. And even if a parent does choose public school, because I do understand that that is the best option for some families, parents still need to be involved in that because it's their responsibility.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast, Faith. This has been a wonderful conversation. As always, this is the Red Quill Media podcast doing candidate conversations here live from the Last Chance Fair and Stampede. Also, a huge shout out and thank you to our sponsor, New Vision Thrift Store, who provided this beautiful set that you see here. So yeah. And we would love if you would come and visit us, maybe hop on a podcast. We're always happy to have any sort of conversations. Great job.
Thank you. That flowed really well.
That was really good. You did a great job.
Okay. Thank you for having me on. And I actually appreciate having that conversation with you because now I know a little bit more. And